This is your host Sapil Bhartiya, and welcome to another episode of TFR Let's Talk. And today we have with us once again Gaurav Rishi, Vice President of Products and Cloud Native at Kasten by Veeam. Gaurav, it's great to have you back on the show.
Hi, Swapnil. A pleasure to be here and good to always talk to you.
Yeah, and today's topic is something close to my interest as well, which is cybersecurity. It has kind of become a hot topic these days, considering the changing geopolitical situation. But the fact is that cybersecurity security has been a topic which was kind of growing in discussion in the especially cloud native world. There is a lot of awareness that is there, but we still see reports. I was just reading a report yesterday from Salt Security that companies still struggle. They are not prepared. Sometimes it does seem that organizations are not using all the tools that are there available to them through the whole CMCF landscape. But before we go into the heart of this topic, I want to understand from your perspective how serious or how seriously companies should take cybersecurity, not only in this changing geopolitical landscape, but also in general, if when more and more workloads are moving to the cloud, and a lot of people are looking at cloud as low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, no, Swapnil, I think you're hitting the nail on the head. Cybersecurity has been a boardroom topic for a long time, and I think it's just becoming even bigger and higher up on the agenda. So, on one hand, that's true. On the other hand, you're also right that a lot of the companies have either not got the plans in place or they just believe that because I'm on the cloud, somehow I'm protected. And both those are obviously big mistakes. And the unfortunate side effect of that is what you see as headlines, whether those are cryptojacking attacks or ransomware attacks. That's really a symptom of the two issues I highlighted. In fact, I think one stat which I still can't completely comprehend is that there is a ransomware attack every 11 seconds in organizations across the globe. So just think about that. And a lot of people talk about this being a question of when, not if, about you getting attacked. So that's the state of affairs, to put it in a nutshell, if you will.
What are some of the key factors that organizations, users, developers, they need to consider in their cyber defense plan? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, no, so I think this is a rich topic. Let me sort of first of all set the right context. So in the context of cloud native applications, and those are growing really fast. I think I've spoken in your conversation with our conversations earlier about how this is a Cambrian moment and the number of applications being built in these cloud native constructs is exploding, right? So there are a huge number of applications coming into production, and that's a big part. Now, in the context of cybersecurity, first of all, let's hit on the point that just moving to the cloud is not security by itself. Organizations need to go ahead and make sure that both, and I'll make it simple, in the pre-production case, which means during development time, you have the right tools in place. And then at production time, while your applications are scaling, people are consuming your content, you have the right tools there too. And then overlying all of those pieces, and we can get into each one of them, but overlying both pre-production and production, you need to have an insurance policy. And that's where backup becomes your last line of defense. And of course, Kasten plays in that context really well, but it's also bleeding into both the pre-production and the production use case as we think about cloud native architectures. So that's the right framework to have in mind simplistically when you think about making sure that you have a protection policy in place in this new cloud native world.
How well designed are Kubernetes systems for cyber attacks to deal with vulnerabilities, or there are gaps, irrespective, whatever the case may be? What can be done? What are the best practices that organizations can do if there are these gaps, so that they are at least protected, in the pre-production stage or production stage?
Yeah, so I think, Swapnil, like you pointed out, with these growing cloud native applications, they all use Kubernetes as the underlying infrastructure or the container orchestration of record. And of course, there are vulnerabilities in the system. So a common one, for example, we do see is getting access to the underlying operating system. And once you have that, either because of privilege escalations or misconfigurations, you can create a lot of damage. And, that's number one issue. But to overlay that on the framework where I was talking about saying, let's think about all of the pre-production related cases. Organizations need to make sure that these cloud native applications, which in turn might be using modules or open source modules coming from various sources, are always scanning them for vulnerabilities, keeping the latest patches and applying those. And that's a big part. And there's sort of good tools which help you with that, whether it's Sysdig or Aquasec or SNCC, but you need to go ahead and have the scanning in place. The second part, I think, again, in the pre-production context, is make sure your IAM policies, for example, if you're working in a context of AWS, are in place so that you're doing the user management. And third, which is also very important, and I think I'm quite excited about, is policy management. So we are seeing policy definition or policy as code coming into play right now. And why that's important is you can go ahead and define as an application owner what might be the protection policies required for that application. Don't put this application in production unless there is a policy defined which talks about that this application needs to be backed up and the constructs around what the backup frequency, etc., are. And so that's a new thing which we are also seeing creep up as a day zero activity right at the pre-production stage. And then on the production side, I think you need to obviously go ahead and enforce the policies, whether it's for network protection, it's to go ahead and make sure the Kubernetes admission policies are taking that into account. We also want to make sure that you have full visibility in terms of alerts and you have comprehensive systems from Cisco or Palo Alto networks which are focused on cloud native security. And then I think, like we talked about earlier, you also need to make sure that when you're going into production, you do have a backup and disaster recovery policy in place, because at the end of the day, ransomware is a disaster. That's the way to think about it.
When you're explaining that, I also kind of felt that we also need to talk a bit about supply chains, open source or software supply chain as well. When you talk about, you're pulling in components from different. So how important is it for companies to also understand software supply chain aspect so that they do know what's coming from where, and then of course use right tools to ensure that the integrity of those packages?
No, that's right. So I think I was talking about constantly scanning your images, and that is indeed hitting on the point around supply chain. I mean, for good or for bad, we do want to go ahead and have innovation. And one way to make sure we have innovation and the speed that a cloud native ecosystem requires, we don't have monoliths. We do want to go ahead and use these modules from a variety of sources. On one hand, having open source components actually is helpful. You can obviously have more eyes, but obviously on the other hand, you want to make sure that you are scanning for CVEs, and both at the time when you're going ahead and putting it into repositories, and we are seeing not only optimized operating systems like Bottle Rocket from Amazon, which are now coming up and are helping secure some of this, but also as soon as you check it into a repository, whether it's from Google or whether it's from Red Hat OpenShift, there's automatic scanning happening out there. So I think the industry is making a lot of advancements in making sure that you have secure operating systems and the applications which go on top of it are automatically scanned. But at the same time, I think the onus is on the application developers and the enterprises using them to make sure that they are indeed leveraging these tools. I know we as Kasten for sure are operator certified on the Red Hat side. We do make sure that we are, as a part of a nightly build test, have these repositories which are doing auto scanning. And those are all examples of what needs to happen to make sure that you have a secure supply chain.
Excellent. And since you brought in automation, I also want to kind of talk a bit about, so the viewers are also aware of the fact, the importance or benefit of using an automated or hands-off policy versus doing everything manually.
Yeah, no, I think automation is a really, really important topic in today's world, because let's live through the life of a ransomware attack for a second. Hopefully what we've talked about is ways to avoid getting hit. But like I keep talking about, you do want to have that insurance policy too. So let's say that you do get hit by a ransomware attack, and it's a ticking time bomb. So in other words, what you as an organization are doing is not only now recovering from the fact that, my God, we've gotten hit, but now you need to make sure you have business continuity in mind. So having automation to first of all go ahead and say, look, let's make sure we have policies in place which are automatically going ahead and keeping all of the applications which are a part of my Kubernetes clusters under some protection. So that itself is a policy, and you need to automate that policy of automatically detecting an application as soon as it's introduced into your cluster, and then making sure there's a backup policy that keeps running. Second, you want to make sure that you're leveraging these automation policies, because as soon as you have a blueprint for protection defined, you can also go ahead and say, look, let me make sure that I'm periodically testing those policies so that in case when I do get hit by a ransomware attack, I have tested what my recovery looks like. And third, automation also comes into play because humans make errors, and you make errors especially when you're under stress. And so when you're under a time pressure where your ransom attack is underway, your ransomware amount might be going up, for example, you want to sort of keep a hands-off approach so that it's not the humans who are going ahead and trying to work under this time pressure, but these time-tested blueprint policies as code, like I mentioned earlier, are in effect. So I think that also eases the pressure that you might have exerted on the system, in addition to finally using the policies to create some level of dynamism. And what I mean by that is you can go ahead and decide that when I do recover, maybe I want to recover in a sandbox environment, or maybe I don't want to recover in the same Kubernetes distribution or the same location. I want to go ahead and take my backups and recover them in a completely different environment. So getting automation to create dynamism of choosing what your target is something that is really important. And to be able to transform that is really part and parcel of what a good solution should do. And that's exactly how Kasten, for example, is architected.
One more thing that I've been hearing a lot from you is also, of course, you should be prepared, but once something goes wrong, you should be able to recover from it. That's where backup and disaster recovery, data recovery kind of things come into play. Before we once again go there, what would you call as the last line of defense? How to build the last line of defense so there are still some protection, no matter how malicious actors are after you? Because first of all, you have to be right all the time. They have to be right only once. Second is that they are, relentlessly trying to find holes in your system. You cannot do that much. So having a last line of defense does help. So how would you define that? How companies can build it?
No, that's right. And I think we use that terminology a lot internally because, frankly, backups are your last line of defense. So like I was alluding to earlier, a ransomware attack is a disaster. You need to go ahead and make sure you have this insurance policy. And the way you should think about this is, if it's the last line of defense, you want to make sure your data integrity is paramount. And the way to go ahead and actually affect that is to make sure when we are, for example, taking backups, not only are we going ahead and using automation, like I explained, to make sure we have policies in place that automatically are backing up the applications, but once they're backed up, you are doing it in an immutable fashion, because the attacks are getting so sophisticated right now that not only do they go ahead and potentially take over your clusters, they might even start attacking your backup retention storage units, which might be an object store, for example. So having the immutability there where they cannot be touched is also as important when you're thinking about the last line of defense. And then, like I was alluding to earlier also, is when you do get to recovery, as your last line of defense, you also want to have the capability of saying you're not tied to a particular type of underlying storage infrastructure or particular Kubernetes distribution. You want to have that freedom of choice to be able to go ahead and have the recovery done in a completely different environment, whether it's a hybrid scenario or whether it's a completely different storage class. So I think those are the key attributes to keep in mind as you're thinking about choosing your tools as the last line of defense when it comes to backup and disaster recovery.
What kind of tools, solutions you have there? Because cloud native is complicated, security is even more complicated, to make it easier for users so that they don't have to worry about, getting attacked, or with ransomware. As you said, nothing is worse than that. So talk about your solutions. How do you help your users and customers?
So I think, first of all, Swapnil, Kasten by Veeam, and our core product is Kasten K10. we've been recognized as the leader when it comes to Kubernetes data protection. So, definitely encourage your audience to go to Kasten.io, read independent sort of reports about how and why we have been chosen. But the use cases that really we focus on and the tools we have are threefold. And we've been very true to our mission and have kept this over the last many years. So the first one is Kubernetes backup and recovery, and doing that at the application level is really important. And that's what we do really well across various types of infrastructure. The second use case is disaster recovery. I think we talked about the fact that ransomware is a disaster, and to be able to then go ahead and do that in an automated fashion is something that, again, is very much built into the way we operate and how Kasten K10 is built. And the third one, which is also extremely important, is application mobility. And in this particular case, Kubernetes brought with it the promise of portability across different types of infrastructure and Kubernetes distributions. And that's exactly how Kasten K10 is architected, so that the customer's freedom of choice turns out to be one of our core tenets. And that's really how we provide the capabilities to help you with this last line of defense that you asked about.
Gaurav, thank you so much for, of course, taking time out today and talk about this topic. It is, as I said, it's becoming a topic which is hotly debated, but also it's very, very essential because security is something that can tarnish your brand. App is slow, everything else will not, destroy your brand, but security compromise is the worst thing. So thanks for not only sharing what risks or challenges are there, but also sharing insights how companies can protect themselves. So once again, thank you for your time today, and I look forward to our next discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Swapnil. Very topical, and thank you again.